My name is Marcus Lane, and I live in Austin, where summer heat sits on the streets like a second roof, and where news travels through group chats faster than thunderstorms cross the river. I work swing shift at a data center that hums like a beehive, and I keep my head down, keep systems alive, and come home before dawn to a quiet house with 2 bedrooms painted with the kinds of colors that sound like promises. I believed in those promises because I was the one who painted them, and because I am the sort of man who thinks work is how you love people. The morning that everything changed began with a video link. I was at my locker taking off a badge when my phone lit with a message from a friend who rarely texts me anything but photos of barbecue and lopsided guitar chords. He wrote only 3 words and a link. He said, "You should see. There are moments when a tiny piece of language carries an earthquake inside it." And that was one of them. I clicked, and the world narrowed to the outline of a restaurant booth lit by warm bulbs and the soft frame of a woman whose face I knew better than my own. Jenna laughed in that fearless way she uses when she wants a room to agree that there is no such thing as consequence. Across from her sat a man who looked bored with his own smile. Cole Ramirez, event partner, charmer by trade. The clip was not a glance. It was a map. It showed hands that have memorized another face. It showed a kiss that was not a hello or a goodbye, but the middle of a story that had already decided how it would end. The caption said "decade in the making," and I felt something in my chest count backwards in a way that made me sit down before I fell. There was a sound under the audio, a clink of glass, and the pressure of a room that does not know it is a witness. The person who posted the clip had blurred other patrons and stamped a time code at the corner. The comments bloomed like a field that grows weeds wherever people think they are gardeners. I stopped the clip, closed the screen, and stared at the metal door of my locker until the gray gave me a steady surface to climb back onto. That morning, I did not go home right away. I drove to the office of a lawyer whose card lived in my wallet for reasons I hoped I would never need. Her name is Rowan Pike, and she speaks like a person who likes facts and is willing to wrestle them from rooms that would prefer to remain vague. I told her what I had seen without raising my voice, and without assigning adjectives to anyone I loved or used to love. Rowan listened, and then asked whether I could preserve the video in a way that would stand up in a room where men and women take oaths. I told her I could download the file and capture the metadata header and request a copy from the platform with a formal letter of preservation. She nodded and said we will need chain. She said we will need to protect the children from the conversation that will erupt. She said we will need to get ahead of rumors that always arrive dressed as concern. I drove to the lab where I had once toured the cold rooms for a systems upgrade and asked for information about accredited DNA testing for minors with court admissibility. The technician spoke softly because laboratories are places that understand grief, even when they are not speaking its name. She explained the protocol and how identity is checked and how the samples are sealed and logged. She said the results would confirm or deny paternity without drama. I thanked her and paid the fee and scheduled a time for the next day after school. I texted the school counselor and asked for a brief meeting about media safety because a video featuring my spouse had begun to circulate, and I wanted to be sure the school could handle any spillover. The counselor replied with a time and a calm sentence about protocol. Calm was the only language I was willing to allow into my house. When I finally drove home, I stopped at the curb and watched the door for a full minute. The house had not changed, and yet it had. It looked like a stage after a show ends, where the props wait for someone to carry them back to storage. I walked in, and the air told me it had been holding its breath. I opened windows and set my phone on the table and began the work of building a timeline. I pulled bank statements and looked for charges that never made sense, but were easy to ignore when a person believes peace is the same as trust. Hotels, restaurants, flower shops with names that sound like quiet. There were flights that did not fit our calendar and gift receipts that accused me with their tidy fonts. I photographed each page in good light and saved every file with names that would mean something months from now when the fog had settled and only structure remained. I did not confront Jenna that day. I did not perform rage for a camera that would give me comments in exchange for my dignity. I wrote a message that said, "We will communicate in writing only from now on." I wrote that there would be no more unplanned visitors at our home. I wrote that there would be a meeting with counsel. She replied in bursts that alternated between disbelief and offense and performance. I did not engage. Performance cannot feed if you do not clap. News online moves like weather in Texas. It arrives fast, it lingers where the land is flat, and it can knock down a fence if you built it for decoration and not for function. I downloaded the clip, captured the header, and wrote an email to the platform with a notice to preserve under my name and counsel name. Rowan sent me a draft to sign that expanded the scope to the original file and any related uploads, including the geotagged location and the account that posted it. She said we were building a bridge, and that bridges do not fall when the river rises if people who know what they are doing put the first bolts in correctly. In the afternoon, the counselor and I sat in her office and mapped a simple plan. Teachers would be briefed without gossip. No phones would be allowed during recess for a few days. Any child that mentioned the video would be redirected with a neutral script. Names would not be said. If a parent attempted to bring it through the gate, the administration would step in and escort the conversation back to adult channels. The counselor asked whether my children were safe with both parents, and I said yes when I am present and when Jenna is alone with them in daylight. I said there would be no third party overnights. She wrote that down as if it were a spell that could hold back the sea. Sometimes a line on paper is a levy. That evening I cooked pasta because pasta forgives the hand of a mind that keeps rechecking the logs. The children told me about their day. The older one asked why people at pickup were whispering. I said adults sometimes catch a rumor and forget to set it down. I said our job was school and sleep and kindness. I sent them to brush their teeth and sat at the table and wrote a statement that the family could use when someone tried to enlist them in the theater of scandal. It said we are handling a private matter through the appropriate channels and ask for privacy for our children. It said speculation harms kids more than it hurts adults. It said thank you for understanding. The statement did not clap for anyone. Jenna came home late and moved through the hall with the caution of a person who wants to be caught being careful. She sat opposite me at the table and waited for me to break the quiet with questions that would let her tell the story she had been writing long before the internet wrote it for her. I did not ask for any story. I said only this: tomorrow afternoon, the children and I will be at a lab for a paternity test. The appointment is set. Please do not make this harder than it needs to be. Her mouth made a shape that once meant disbelief and now looked like a mask. She said a word that sounded like why. I said because the truth will be the only thing that gets us through the next part without tearing everything down. She stood, paced, returned, and finally nodded in a way that told me she understood that the era of improvisation had ended. The lab took our names and checked our documents and made the process as untheatrical as dentistry. A nurse swabbed cheeks and sealed envelopes and placed labels with numbers that made my stomach feel like I was reading the serial number of a part that would either fix a machine or leave it humming itself to death. The kids were brave because kids have a way of adapting to a calendar if adults stop turning every task into a referendum on human worth. We went out for ice cream, and I let them pick flavors that sound like arguments, and they sat in the sun and ate and laughed and did not ask questions they were not ready to ask. That was my job. I would ask the questions to rooms with walls thick enough to absorb the answers. Rowan called to say that the platform had acknowledged our notice. and that the restaurant owner had been contacted by an investigator who wanted to verify the origin of the video. The owner, a woman who runs her place like a small country where kindness pays the taxes, called me herself and said she did not want to be in the middle of this, but she would tell the truth about her cameras. She said a former employee had access, and that access had been misused. She would supply logs and a copy of the original footage and timestamp data. She said she was sorry for my children. People who feed a city know who gets hurt when grown-ups behave like teenagers with better cars. After dinner that night, I printed a calendar for the last year and started drawing a line for every night Jenna said she had another meeting. I placed the hotel charges next to the lines and added the flight confirmation for a conference that I now knew was a trip for two dressed as a work obligation. I marked the weekends when Cole had a supposed family emergency that required Jenna to drop off a care package across town. The pattern folded onto itself like a map that reveals a road someone wanted to keep secret, but could not help leaving signposts along. The timeline did not ask me to rage. It asked me to prepare. The DNA results arrived faster than I expected because the world loves to make some pain efficient. The lab called Rowan first and then called me. The voice reminded me of a metronome. It said both children are mine with certainty as heavy as a book. I sat on the porch alone and watched early traffic float by and felt a pressure release I did not know I had stored behind my ribs. I had known it in my bones, and still the confirmation landed like water. I called the counselor and let her know that the school did not need to prepare for any new names in our story. I wrote a note for the family that said simply, "The children are mine," without adjectives. Jenna sent a message that said she was glad, at least that part is not complicated. I read the words and set the phone down and did not reply. Rowan filed for separation with requests that matched the shape of the river we were about to cross. Exclusive use and possession of the house so the children have a stable place to sleep. A temporary order that bars third parties from staying overnight when the children are present. A non-disparagement clause to keep loud mouths from using small faces as shields. A constructive trust to recover funds spent on hotels and gifts and travel that did not involve the family and did not involve anything but a long run of selfishness. A request for the preservation of digital records and for access to the original video as an exhibit that no one would need to see again if the other side understood the wisdom of conceding when the math is already on the chalkboard. I told my parents in the living room because I will not allow this story to be told to them by a stranger in the produce aisle. My father looked at the floor and then at me, and then at the window where the world was doing its usual job of existing without caring who just discovered they have been living with a false ledger. My mother asked if the kids were okay, and I said they were better than me in the way kids sometimes are when they have a list of things to do before bed. And adults have nothing but time to imagine every kind of disaster. My parents asked me what I needed, and I said I needed them to be steady in public and direct in private. I said I needed them to remember that gossip is a game that pays everyone in shame. They nodded and promised. The investigator who reached out to the restaurant gathered statements and pulled security logs that matched the time code of the viral clip. There was an internal ID stamped on the file that linked to a workstation used by a former shift lead. The account that posted the video had been created from a device that logged into the restaurant Wi-Fi near closing time. The device had also posted other gossip clips about nightlife in town. The investigator said the city eats its own and that sometimes you have to show it a mirror, and sometimes you have to take the mirror away. I said I only needed the metadata and not a sermon. And he laughed and said, "Fair point." I learned that Cole had a partner who had been living with a different version of him. A version that shows up to volunteer days and knows the names of teachers and pretends to be the kind of man who can hold a promise without squeezing it until it breaks. She sent Rowan a quiet email through counsel that said she had copies of receipts and messages that would help a judge understand the scale of the trespass. The email did not ask for revenge. It asked for accuracy. We met at a coffee shop where people come to do bookkeeping and not to romance. and she slid a file across the table that made the long line of stupidity look like a parade that never bothered to veil itself. I thanked her and wished her a future that did not depend on anyone else's hunger for applause. Jenna tried to stage a conversation that would let her cry at the right time, and then get to the part where she asks for forgiveness as a gesture of sophistication. I told her that all communication would go through counsel and that I would answer only those points that concerned the children and logistics. She sent long messages, and I responded with dates and times and the kind of sentences you can carry in a pocket without them leaking. The children asked why we were rotating houses, and I said because adults broke a promise. And the best way to keep children safe is to give them routines that hold their shape. They asked if they did anything wrong, and I said no, and meant it, until the word felt like a bell that approached and then passed, and then returned at a regular pace. At work I kept quiet because silence has weight, and because I needed the job to remain a job and not a jury. A coworker who loves to press his nose against other people's windows walked by my station and cleared his throat and said wild times online. I looked at him until he remembered that silence can be a wall, and he went away. My manager asked if I needed time off. I said I needed predictable hours and a social media filter that did not exist. He laughed, then stopped, then said the schedule was mine to claim for as long as I needed steady nights while the court turned. The first hearing arrived like a dentist appointment for a tooth that has been complaining for months. The judge read the filings and granted the requests that protect children because the law understands that when adults start a fire, smoke will always look for small lungs. Exclusive use and possession of the house for me until final orders. Temporary morality clause that restricts overnight guests when the children are present. Preservation of records. Instructions to both parties to refrain from using social media to wage war through implication. The judge did not lecture. He looked at the timeline and at the ledger and at the DNA confirmation, and nodded as if all this were sadly ordinary. In rooms like that, ordinary is a curse and a comfort. Jenna Job opened an investigation because the man with whom she had chosen to build a second life was also a vendor with a contract that frowned on personal entanglements with client staff. Compliance is a slow animal, but it eventually finds its way to the watering hole. Emails were collected. Calendars were downloaded. Expense reports were cross-checked against restaurant reservations. The line between personal and professional dissolved in daylight. Jenna called me and left a message that used words like humiliation and mistake and context. I did not return the call. I let counsel be my voice because I have learned that your own words can be used against your future when someone wants to edit your life into an episode that entertains them for an evening. The second shock landed on a Tuesday. The lab phoned to inform Rowan that a second sample had been submitted under my full name and date of birth, with an attempt to change chain custody. The staff caught the anomaly because they had been told to expect no additional submissions. A copy of the lab security footage showed a man in a cap with a fold of paper that tried to pass as authority. The technician refused the sample and noted the time and the plate of the car that left in a hurry. Rowan sent a letter that afternoon warning all parties that any attempt to tamper with evidence would become the centerpiece of a future motion. Sometimes caution reads like poetry to me. I asked the school for a list of pickup passwords and reviewed every adult approved to collect the kids. Jenna removed Cole under pressure from her own counsel. My parents added their names with relief that looked like sleep given back after a month of theft. The counselor began a short unit on media literacy in homerooms, not to address our case, but to help a generation that thinks truth appears at the top of a feed if you hit refresh enough. Kids practiced asking, "How do we know this?" and "Who wants us to feel what?" I listened from the back and thought the city might be teaching itself how to breathe without gossip again. When the company concluded its review, Jenna received a suspension without pay that turned into a resignation. Cole lost his contract and a spread of other gigs because businesses that sell images to the public do not enjoy being attached to decade-long deceit that unfolded under their logo. I would be lying if I said I felt nothing when I heard. I felt the kind of sadness that follows a storm across a flat field. People make choices, and those choices move in straight lines until they hit fences. Some fences are legal, and some are social, and some are quiet lines in the sand that friends and neighbors draw when they decide they value quiet work more than noisy charm. Mediation came like a long drive across West Texas. The view does not change much, but miles still pass. The mediator asked each side to speak, without turning the room into a stage. I went first because I wanted the children to be the first line on the agenda. I asked for primary custody with generous time for Jenna when she is doing her duty with clear eyes and tidy calendars. I asked for the non-disparagement clause to shield small ears. I asked for the morality clause to shield small rooms from strangers at 2 a.m. I asked for the constructive trust to return money to the estate that had been wasted on a second life. I asked for the house so that shampoo bottles and shoes would not need to learn a new floor plan for no good reason. Jenna asked for understanding, then time, then money that felt like I was paying rent on a floor I built. The mediator did his job, which is to keep people in the room until paper appears that can be signed without anyone catching fire. We reached terms that respected the children and respected the concept that money has a trail. The constructive trust was calculated from the ledger we built and agreed by both sides after an afternoon of arithmetic that made everyone quiet. The custody plan looked like a week that a child could memorize without help. The house remained mine with a refinance schedule that made sense. Social media clauses burned out the oxygen that drama requires. I did not dance in triumph. I walked out and sat in the car and let the air do that thing it does when a weight lifts and leaves a bruise that will one day become memory. I copied the final orders and put them in a folder with a name I will recognize when I'm older. I returned to work and learned the new version of my life by repetition. Mornings, breakfasts, school drop-offs, emails to teachers, badges at the data center, lunch from a cooler, because I am done with meals bought at places that gaslight you with dim light and small plates. Afternoons with homework and cartoons that do not turn children into products. Evenings when the house sounds like the inside of a seashell and you can hear your own blood without thinking you are dying. Nights when sleep arrives because it has been invited and not because you collapse. Online, the video kept doing what videos do, which is to teach strangers that they can have an opinion about you without ever shaking your hand. Friends asked how I could stand it. I told them that caring about the collective attention span of people who forget what they were mad about by Friday is a kind of vanity, and I am not vain. What I care about is whether my children believe me when I say I will be there at 3:15, and whether the school believes me when I say I will not let my trouble leak into their hallways. Months passed. I took the kids to the river on days when the sun behaved, and we sat under a live oak and ate sandwiches and learned clouds. I fixed a wobbly chair at my mother's house and replaced a blown fuse at my father's workshop and refused to let them pay me in anything but pie. I serviced the car and changed air filters and scrubbed the kitchen tile until it looked like a good decision. I did all the boring things that, when added together, make a life you can stand at the sink and admire without clapping. Jenna tried once more to pull the story back to a place where she could narrate. She sent a long letter about how love can return in new forms and how people can reinvent their families if they are brave. I filed the letter and did not annotate it. Reinvention is for furniture. Families are not side tables. They are foundations. If you crack them and pour water into the fracture long enough, winter will pry them apart and summer will pretend it is fine until the roof dips and you wonder why rain keeps showing up in the bedroom. I am done with roofs that pretend. Cole moved out of town, or at least out of my sightline. The woman who had helped with documents sent one more email through council that said she had taken a job in another city and was doing fine. I wished her well without typing the words. I am learning that some wishes work better when they live in the chest and do not demand currency on paper. I wondered sometimes whether the video had saved me. It is a hard thing to admit that a piece of digital gossip could be the bridge you needed. Without it, I might have continued to live with a story that did not belong to me. Doing math that never balanced and telling my children to go to bed early because morning comes for those who keep faith. Morning does not care about your faith. It cares about whether you set the alarm and whether your roof holds and whether your feet hit the floor because you trusted your own hands when you needed to build a new path. I got a message from the restaurant owner one afternoon. She said the former employee had been charged with unauthorized access violations and that she was using the case to implement better security and to train staff on ethics. She hoped my children were doing better. I wrote back and told her they were, and that I appreciated people who turn harm into policy instead of into a series of excuses. She said she believes cities get better when small businesses act like grown-ups. I believe that too. One day at pickup, a father asked how I kept from exploding. I told him that explosions only feel good in movies. In real life, they send shrapnel into people who did not hurt you. He said he had never thought of it like that. He said he would try to act like a citizen the next time he wanted to smash his life to make a point. I told him we can be citizens together and that he could text me when he needed a bench to sit on that came with silence and not advice. When the final decree came in the mail with a stamp that felt like a hand on a shoulder, I read it in the kitchen while the kids colored, and the dog across the alley barked at a squirrel that had no intention of leaving the fence. The decree was not poetry, and it did not try to make anyone feel better. It laid out the schedule, the financials, the agreements we had signed, and the consequences for breaking them. It was the grid under the map that allows a person to say, "We will meet here," and then to show up, because both of you can count. The DNA results live in a folder in a drawer that locks. I do not open it. I do not need to anymore. The children look like me when they are tired, and like their mother when they are about to make a joke. They are not evidence. They are people teaching me that mornings are worth rehearsing. They claim the house with homework spread across the table and shoes that migrate like small, unplanned storms. They sleep. They wake. They ask for pancakes and for mercy when they spill syrup, because hands that small have not yet learned how gravity hates overconfidence. On a Sunday, I took apart a broken lamp that had belonged to my grandmother. The wiring had hardened and the switch stuck. I replaced the cord and bought a new switch and polished the base until it remembered a shine that it thought it had lost. When I set it on the table and clicked the new switch, the room accepted light as if nothing bad had ever happened under that light. Things can be repaired. Some cannot. The trick is learning which is which before you spend the rest of your life trying to solder a crack that runs all the way to the foundation. There are nights when I sit on the back steps and listen to the cricket choir and think about the person I was a year ago. He was a man who believed that you can outwork suspicion by being more generous than the problem requires. I forgive him. I tell him that he did fine with the tools he had. I tell him that he learned to ask for help exactly when he was supposed to. I tell him to go to bed, because the kids will wake up at 7 and demand a breakfast that looks exactly the way they like it, and that this is as holy as anything a church could offer. And yes, sometimes the video reappears in a new context. A meme with the corners cut off and the colors changed to make it look like another night at another table. People tag friends and pretend they are archaeologists discovering a lost world. I ignore it because the present is louder. The present is a math worksheet and a missing shoe and the smell of coffee and a text from a friend asking if I can help move a couch and a reminder from the school about picture day. The present does not care what the internet believes. The present cares about lunch. I think about telling this story to my children when they are older. I will not give them the video. I will give them the timeline. I will tell them that their father learned to be a man who believes paper more than performance. I will tell them that they have a right to ask for proof and a right to change a plan when the truth arrives with a frown. I will tell them that love can look like a new toothbrush on a night when you did not expect company. I will tell them that there are people who use charm like a crowbar and that you can learn to hear the metal in their voices. I will tell them to be kind anyway. There is a wall in the hallway with 3 framed photos. One from a day at the river, one from the kitchen where flour fell like slow snow when we were learning biscuits, one from a park with swings that made the sky look closer. I stand in front of the frame some evenings and rearrange them just enough that I can believe I am still making new choices. It is not denial. It is curation. It is the right to choose the light your house remembers. The case files are in a box. The box is in the attic. I label it with a date and a word I can live with. Closure is too strong and healing is too sentimental. I choose maintenance. Maintenance is the truth that keeps engines running and keeps neighborhoods alive. I will carry that box down only when someone asks a real question in a real room where respect hangs in the air like a standard. Otherwise, the box can learn patience among the other things that my life keeps but does not worship. I used to think revenge requires noise. It does not. Revenge in my life looked like turning down the volume on chaos until the people who fed on it had to take their show to another town. It looked like a line in a decree that says both parties agree not to smear each other and to keep their partners away from small beds. It looked like money moving back to a column where it belonged. It looked like children sleeping through the night. Sometimes I drive past the restaurant where the clip was born, and I nod to the sign as if we survived a war together. The owner waves, and I wave back, and we both go about our day. I tip more than I used to, because service is a promise, and because I am grateful to any worker who shows up every day to hold up one corner of the city. The city needs that more than it needs gossip. I needed that more than I needed applause. I am not better than anyone else, and I am not a saint. I am a man who chose a road that led away from noise and toward a schedule I can keep. I am a father who can say his children are his without pause. I am a citizen who believes rules matter most when we want to pretend they do not. I am a friend who will sit next to you at the park and not ask for details you are not ready to say out loud. I am a worker who will keep another engine running tonight while the rest of the city sleeps. That is how I pay for my peace. And if you need a last image, see this. The kitchen is warm. The table holds bowls and pencils and a glass with a small bouquet the kids picked from the edge of the yard. The dog across the alley complains. The streetlight hums. The air is still. My phone is face down and quiet. There is no applause. There does not need to be. The lights are on. The house holds. We are here. After the first hearing, I started to learn the geography of the courthouse. The elevators moved with the unhurried stamina of old horses. The clerks knew which pens worked. The hallway smelled like paper and coffee and patience. I noticed who wore suits that fit and who wore suits that bragged. Rowan walked like a person who had learned to conserve energy for the moment that mattered. She taught me to bring water and to write down the names of every official I met. Not because I planned to hold anyone to account, but because memory fails when nerves pretend to help. The restaurant owner delivered the original clip on a drive sealed with tamper tape, and the investigator logged the transfer in handwriting neat enough to make a teacher proud. I signed the receipt with a hand that did not shake and placed the drive in a small safe at home. Chain of custody is a simple phrase that does heavy lifting. It turns spectacle into evidence, and it turns gossip into facts. Without it, I would only be another man waving at the wind and asking it to settle down. Cole sent a message through a friend asking to talk, man to man. I declined because I have no interest in building a new stage for a performer who thinks remorse is a costume. I told the friend that all communication should go through counsel and that I would only respond to lawful requests or matters directly involving the children. The friend tried to make it about pride. I made it about paper. Paper does not enjoy drama. Paper likes dates and times and signatures and the kind of ink that dries without smudging. A neighbor sent a casserole and a note that said no questions. I heated the dish and fed the kids and texted a thank you. In a city that loves to record itself, the refusal to ask for details felt like a gift. The children told me the noodles tasted like the ones their grandmother makes, which is the highest honor food can receive in this house. I washed the dish and left it on the neighbor porch with a card and a promise to return the kindness when their life tilted. It felt like we were part of a village, not just a street. On nights when I could not sleep, I stood at the window and watched the empty road and the way distant traffic threw a pale ribbon across the horizon. I imagined all the lives moving through that dark, each carrying a small bag of secrets and receipts. I promised myself I would keep my bag small and my receipts neat. The promise did not change the past. It changed the way I held the present. Rowan asked me if I wanted to pursue a claim against the former employee who leaked the video. I told her that the criminal process would do what it does without me, and that my energy belonged to the children and to building a house that would not buckle under gossip. She said that this choice would read as grace. I said it was thrift. Even grace needs a budget, or it spends the rent. The counselor at school began holding a small circle for children who lived with parents moving in separate directions. My son did not want to go at first. He said he was not broken. I told him circles are not only for broken things. They are for people who want to learn how to carry a weight without dropping it on their own toes. He went. He returned with a drawing of a bridge and a new word. Resilience. He said it means you bend without breaking. I told him he had just defined how I wanted to live from now on. I sat with my own parents on their porch one evening and listened to cicadas argue with the moon. My father told me about the time he thought my mother would leave because work kept him away, and the house seemed to sigh when he came in late. He said people can lose track of their own lives, even when they are trying to do right by them. He said sometimes the only prayer worth praying is help me see what I'm doing. He squeezed my shoulder and said I had done well by the kids. My mother handed me a blanket because the night had decided to pretend it was fall. As compliance at Jenna's former job continued, I learned more about how casually people blend work and pleasure when they think they will never be asked to explain the bill. There were tickets to a series in another city that were coded as client development. There were hotel blocks reserved under a shell name that looked like an intern had typed it and never realized it would be the cord that pulls a curtain. There were town cars that went to the same place at the same time for a year. Part of me wanted to yell. A larger part of me wanted only to never see any of it again once the math had been done. One afternoon, I took the kids to a park, where the swings are hung from a frame that looks like a sculpture. They pumped their legs and leaned back, and the sky looked very close. I sat on a bench and allowed my shoulders to drop. A stranger sat beside me and said that my kids seem happy. I said they are, and thanked him without offering footnotes. The man nodded and returned to his book. I took that as a blessing granted by the city. May you be allowed to live a life that does not need an audience. When the mediator sent the draft agreement, I printed it and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a calm head. The language about non-disparagement felt like a fence post that had finally found the right depth. I underlined the parts that protected the children from sleepovers with strangers and from social media blasts written for sympathy. I asked Rowan to tighten a sentence about holiday schedules so that no one could pretend a comma meant freedom. We sent back the edits and received a final version that read like a map you could follow, even if the lights went out. During the weeks when the city treated our pain like a new season of television, I found a rhythm that ignored ratings. Up at 6. Coffee. Lunches made. Shoes located. Breakfast cooked. School drop-off. Work, home, dinner, homework. Reading, bed, repeat. There is a holiness to repetition when it is done with intent. It builds a wall that noise has to climb. Most noise is lazy and gives up before it reaches the top. Cole attempted to post a long confession online that painted himself as a man overcome by love. He used phrases that made my teeth grind. He turned hurt into art and tried to sell tickets to a redemption story that had not earned a single intermission. The post vanished within hours, likely under pressure from counsel, but the screenshots did their round. I did not reply in any forum. I will not negotiate in a public square where the loudest person wins the microphone. I let the decree speak for me. It spoke clearly. A cousin asked if I would ever consider being friends with Jenna for the sake of the children. I said the children need parents who act like adults, not friends who pretend the past is a casual misunderstanding. Friendship is a luxury that comes after accountability, not a shortcut around it. We can be civil. We can be organized. We can be on time. If one day the children choose to host a room where both of us can sit without the air changing, I will accept the invitation and behave. The kids asked about the word clause because they heard it at school when the counselor described rules for the lunch line. I told them a clause is a promise dressed in writing. If you break it, there is a cost. If you keep it, there is peace. They asked if all families use clauses. I said they do, even if they never put them on paper. Some families keep them. Some pretend they never agreed. We will be the first kind. Rowan surprised me once with a question about what I want 5 years from now that has nothing to do with court or money. I said I want to stand in the bleachers and watch a game without checking my phone for fire. I want to spend a weekend building a treehouse that no one will try to sell. I want to learn to make a sauce my grandmother talked about but never wrote down. Rowan smiled and said, "Then we will build the present in a way that makes those goals bored because they will be so easy." When the decree began to settle into daily life, I noticed that the kids slept deeper. Their teachers said they laughed more and argued less. I do not pretend my house is a miracle. I know only this. Children measure time by the reliability of adults. If you show up when you say you will. They develop a spine you cannot see but can hear every time they say yes, sir, to a hard task and mean it. I drove past a billboard for a firm that promises to punish cheaters with maximum noise. For a second, I wondered what my life would look like if I had chosen that road. It might have been louder. It might have been shorter. It would not have been better. Noise wears out the person who makes it. Silence and paper last longer because they are made of different fibers. A reporter left a card in my mailbox with a handwritten note that said he wanted to tell the real story and that he would be kind. I threw the card away. Kindness in print is still print. Print gives a story legs it does not need. My children deserve a house where their father is a person and not a character. I will protect that house with habits and locks and the boring skill of refusing attention. When the kids went to their mothers for a weekend under the new schedule, I cleaned the house and then got very still. The quiet had weight, and not all of it was good. I let the weight sit on the couch like a guest who had nowhere to go. Then I stood up and cooked, ran the laundry, sharpened a knife that had been dull for months, and read a book that had waited on the mantel like a patient friend. The quiet grew lighter. By Sunday night, I remembered that solitude can be an ally when you stop asking it to fill in for company. One evening, the counselor called to tell me the school had intercepted a rumor that one of my children might not be mine. She said a student had repeated something they heard at home. She said the teacher corrected it gently and moved on, and that the child who said it looked confused by the idea of fact. I thanked her and delivered cookies to the office the next day with a card that said, "Thank you for guarding the gates." Schools do holy work with very little sleep. There was a thunderstorm on a Friday that knocked out power for an hour. The kids and I lit a candle and told stories that did not involve heroes or villains. We told stories about breakfasts and about a dog that believes the mailman is his best friend, and about the time a kite got stuck in a tree and a neighbor climbed a step ladder and rescue became a neighborhood project. When the lights returned, we felt richer than before. Maybe that is the real revenge in a life like this. You build a house that can enjoy a power outage. Rowan closed the file with a letter that listed what to keep and for how long and what to shred after the calendar turns. She said I had been a model client. I told her she had been a steady captain. We shook hands, and I walked out into a day that felt like a clean page. I did not know what story I would write on it, but I knew it would not start with a video and it would not end with a caption. On the anniversary of the day the clip arrived, I made dinner that required stirring and patience. The kids set the table without being asked, because some habits grow out of gratitude even when no one names them. We ate and then took a walk to the corner where a live oak throws shade across the end of the block. We stood under it and watched the sky find purple. I whispered a simple thanks to whatever in this world awards second chances to people who choose the slower road. Then we went home and put dishes in soapy water and called it a night.